Our guest of honor this year and speaker is going to be Mark Schultz. Mark is, of course, best known in Howard circles for illustrating the first volume of the Wandering Star and Del Rey Conan books, and he's also did the cover for our edition of Worms of the Earth and the cover for whatever the Esau Cairn thing is, the Almuric.
Science fantasy.
Pardon? Science fantasy, right. Ask Rob, I don't know anything about our publishing. Mark has been a long-time icon in the comics industry. I'm not going to get too much into all of that stuff. He talked a lot about this afternoon. I will note, I asked Mark about it, this is not his first time in Cross Plains. This is not his second or even his third. This is his fourth time in Cross Plains. He had ask him later about his first trip to Cross Plains. It was apparently rather amusing, and his friend Manny was with him. So without any further ado here, I'm going to let the pride of Clark Summit, PA, come up here and speak. Mark Schultz.
This first piece is my comic book, Xenozoic Tales, which is my own property, which is a science fiction adventure comic book series. Okay, Kevin. And I also write comics. I write this Prince Valiant newspaper strip, and on rare occasions I've also stepped in and drawn it. And this is an example of one of the Sunday strips that I drew myself. Okay. I'm also an illustrator of both fiction and nonfiction prose. I like science fact as much as I like science fiction, and I enjoy illustrating both. Okay, next one. And this is an example of my science fiction illustration with a little bit of I put this in because I feel it has a little bit of a Lovecraftian bent to it. But I also do science fact, and I get to do flesh out paleontological discoveries sometime. I work with scientists to give flesh to the paleontological fossil discoveries they make. Okay, but my real passion is for good storytelling, and back at the turn of this century, I was lucky enough to be contacted by Marcello Anciano, who is at Wandering Star, about providing illustrations for the first volume of a new collection of Robert E. Howard's Conan stories, pulled from his original text. And I think most of us are familiar with the Wandering Star books and the quality. And this was the kind of project that as an illustrator you just dream of getting. They're in short supply, but I got to do color and black and white illustrations for an entire book. I was at the right place at the right time, and along with Gary Gianni and Gary Manches, I got to contribute to a Howard collection of exceptional importance. And these are examples of both Gary and Gregory's work here. Okay, but getting back to my appreciation of good storytelling, Robert Howard in particular has long held my interest for various reasons that have evolved over the years, from the time I discovered him when I was 13 years old right up until today. But why Howard? My interest in story, particularly in adventure, fantasy, and science fiction, extends back to my introduction in school of the classic myths of Egypt, Greek, and Norse mythology. And like a lot of kids in my age bracket, I progressed through these myths to Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, Tolkien, and Edgar Rice Burroughs. And Burroughs is that well-established gateway drug that leads to the pulp magazine authors. And for me, that meant the Weird Tales triumvirate, H.P. Lovecraft, Clark Ashton Smith, and Robert E. Howard here. This is a Bran McMorn illustration I did. Well, I was absolutely floored by all these authors, but Howard, above all of them, really stuck. I just responded to his works. I couldn't read them fast enough, and I devoured paperback after paperback of the reprinted Howard material as it appeared in the late 60s publishing explosions. I loved Howard's canny, seamless combination of heroic adventure with its combination of that with atmospheric horror. and his sense of the weight of deep time, all told with such a flair for the English language. What I did not understand right away, but I surely felt, was his distinctive voice, his personal view of life and destiny, which rises so clearly through his works. I didn't understand at the time how much that was a reflection of his life and his environment here in Cross Plains. And I'll tell you, the first actual contact I ever had with Cross Plains was I wanted to pick up a copy of Novelyn Price's One Who Walked Alone. And I contacted the publisher, and he told me that they were out of print. He didn't have any, but he said, why don't you get in touch with the Cross Plains Library? So to me, this was a mythological land that I'd read about since I was a kid, but it was no more real to me than the Hyborian Age. But I did call here, and I'm betting it was Joan McGowan I talked to on the phone, Joan, and yeah, they got me a copy out, and I just treasured the envelope that came with the Cross Plains address on it as much as I did the book. But to get back to Howard, he was working in genres and with tropes that hailed from old European sources. Yeah, let's go to the next one. Yeah, okay. But he was pulling from old European sources, but his obsession with independence and personal freedom, his sense of fatality at odds with an unquenchable urge to rebel against the preordained, marked his voice, I believe, as a truly American phenomenon. His protagonists are not born elite. They are not by birth noble, which is part of the European tradition, but they come from common origins and make themselves extraordinary through personal effort and merit. His democratic take on the old world epic adventure was something new to me and made an impression, made Howard something unique and relatable to me. He was a by God 20th century American poet who just happened to write in the genres that I personally valued. So, beyond the other authors whose work I enjoyed, Robert Howard offered a deeper, more personal interpretation of genre formula and the tropes involved with that. He used the tropes to explore issues that mattered to him. There's a worldview, a consistent system of values and perspective that runs throughout his entire output. And I absolutely believe that this elevates his best work beyond genre convention and makes it deserving of attention in a far broader forum. And for me as an illustrator, illuminating Howard's works offered the opportunity to dig past the descriptive and the plot details and to try to get to something that goes to the heart and soul that makes his stories far more textured and nuanced than one expects from genre fiction. Of course, there are many facets to Howard's works, and like all great writers, there's a mix of many ingredients. And any of that mix of various ingredients might attract a reader for different reasons. There were certain aspects that certainly attracted me, and I've chosen some examples of the artists who've illustrated aspects of Howard's work, and these are illustrators that have in particular influenced me or pointed me in directions I wanted to explore. Now this is a limited subjective group I've chosen. I'm not making any qualitative statements here. These are just my influences, people that have been important to me because I feel they exemplify what I find important about Howard. Okay, let's go to the next. Okay, I'll start with the Weird Tales illustrators who were illustrating Howard's stories before his works attained the recognition and iconic status they later gained. Two in particular impressed me. One is the cover artist Margaret Brundage. And of course, she was an expert at taking whatever minor damsel in distress elements that could be ferreted out of a text and maximizing its commercial potential on the cover. She knew that half-naked women and monsters equaled sales. And why, by today's standards, she may not be doing Howard Stories any great services, she did know how to bring undiscriminating readers' attention to Howard's works, and we owe her a thanks for that. At its most basic, that's the illustrator's job, to get the attention of uninitiated readers, and she did a great job of that. Okay. Now, let's go to the next one. That's another Brundage. Now, this is the interior artist Hugh Rankin, for which one of the awards that the foundation gives out is named. Hugh Rankin could take any subject matter and render it very creepy crawly. He just had a style that just oozed swamps and dank things. And he was perfect for Weird Tales because those were the values that they really wanted to, that was the focus of Weird Tales. And he was great at promoting what Weird Tales did best. They weren't really all that interested in Howard's heroic adventure elements, I don't believe. They liked the atmospheric, otherworldly qualities in his work. And it's this otherworldly quality. Go to the next one, yeah. Or the next one after this, too. Yeah, that's the Shadow King. That's one of his best Howard illustrations. It's, I believe that this creepy crawly quality that's so much a part, it's so much a part of the horror in Howard's work. It doesn't get enough attention amongst illustrators today, but these guys were so good at it. And you'll note, too, that compared to the way Howard's heroes are depicted by illustrators today, these guys aren't bulging muscles. They look kind of wimpy almost by today's standards, but that wasn't an issue at the time. Back in the 1930s, there was much greater emphasis put on the atmosphere in the piece and less on the physical quality of the heroes. Okay. Now after Weird Tales, I didn't see a heck of a lot happening that was interesting in illustrating, in Howard illustration, except for there was the Gnome Press series in the 50s did a lot of very, I don't think they did Howard great service because they were pulling more from the Roman sword and sandal movies that were popular in the 50s, and it didn't really reflect Howard very well by my estimation. But this is an example of a cartoonist named Wally Wood who also did illustration, and I just had to put him up because I love his stuff so much. There's a loopy quality to it. It's very cartooned, but this guy could very economically create mood and atmosphere. And that's been a big influence on me, and we'll see a little later, it's a big influence on another important Howard illustrator. Okay? Now this is an example of Roy Krenkel, and this is 1960s where this guy started doing Howard work, and a lot of it was for the amateur press, but he was important because he really paid attention to the historical groundings in Howard's work, and he was excellent at rendering the environment in Howard's world. He would do landscapes and architecture, and just beautifully realized. Okay, next one. Oh, I'm sorry, that's Krenkel again. That's the cover for Call. Okay, but now we get to what everyone most associates with Howard. This is, of course, Frank Frazetta. And you just can't get past talking about Frank Frazetta for better and for worse. And I'll explain what I mean by that. But Frazetta did set the standard for this sort of heroic fiction illustration, and has probably introduced more new readers to Howard than any other single agent. He's an original, and he pulled from a lot of sources, including Krenkel and Wood, who I just showed, as well as the early 20th century illustrators, such as N.C. Wyeth here, and Hal Foster, the creator of Prince Valiant. These were both big influences on Frazetta, but he made his own thing out of these elements, okay? It's powerful stuff. Frazetta is a master of both capturing the brutal, action-packed intensity of Howard's works and of creating a mood of shadowy horror, as I exemplified earlier with Hugh Rankin's works. Frazetta kind of combined it all. Frazetta's skill in imbuing his compositions with shadowy, half-seen monstrosities and sinister low-key lighting is what hooked me. But there is, personally, that's what drew me in. But beyond that, there's no doubt that it's his depiction of Conan, in particular, as a force of primitive, indomitable nature that really caught the public's imagination. Frazetta locked into a growing cultural obsession with highly defined muscular development. And although his models for the physical look of Conan came at least in part from 19th century strongmen such as Eugene Sandow, whose body shape was defined by his use of weights and lifts of the working man, rather than by the use of modern Nautilus-type equipment that creates a musculature defined by aesthetics, rather than by real-world, task-oriented labor. Show the next Sandow here, too. Okay. Okay. So this is absolutely an exaggerated physique, but it's one based on muscle groups that are developed as a working man would. It's just that these guys had much lower body fat. Then you know, the strongest men I've ever known have been farm workers, and baling hay will make you as strong as anything I've ever seen. But you know, generally they don't have the body shape that looks like this. But if with diet and stuff, this was kind of the ideal in the 19th century. And Frazetta pulled from this, so he got a character who was very defined, very muscular, but was based on someone who did real labor like a warrior would. Now, Jeff Jones followed Frazetta's lead in the 1970s, and he brought a poetic interpretation to Howard's works, which was great. This next one is a Jeff Jones, too. But unfortunately, in my opinion, beyond Jones, there were too many other illustrators who followed in Frazetta's footsteps, who tried to imitate Frazetta's physicality without really understanding what made that physicality work. And more importantly, they missed the illumination of Howard's spirit. And the trouble is, the cultural obsession with bulging muscles overtook much of the other wonderful elements that Howard brought to the table, and that Frazetta painted so brilliantly. The image of Conan as an increasingly muscle-bound physical specimen, augmented with gnashing teeth, glaring eyes, and dressed in heavy metal regalia, became the easily digested icon commonly recognized today. Now, what Frazetta pulled from this grew into this. And again, there's nothing wrong with this, but it's such a powerful image that it's good because it's responsible for a lot of Conan's popularity and thus a lot of Howard's popularity. But it's unfortunate that this image has become such a powerful image that it's overpowered a wider appreciation for all the other wonderful elements in Howard's work, the richness in his legacy. But it is what it is, and this is what illustration can do. It can serve both as a lure for new readers, and Frazetta's ace covers brought me to Howard, but one does hope that it lures without warping the appreciation for the material depicted. Okay, so I'm going to end my sermon about that here and get back to my little rant. Let's go to the next one. So, what did I want to accomplish with my illustrations of Howard's stories? A good illustration always stays true to the spirit of the author's work. So first, I sat down and reread all the material with which I'd be working on that first Conan volume. I made careful notes of Howard's descriptions, which, as it turned out, were always more economical and insightful than what they seemed when I first read them. Howard really knows how to engage your imagination with a relatively few well-chosen adjectives. And when I read him as a kid, I thought he was doing all this description of every little aspect and detail. But then when I read him as an adult, I realized, no, he just was smart enough. He chose his word carefully, and it engages your imagination. And that's true genius, in my opinion. So in the case of my figuring my look for Conan, I wanted a physique representative of a working man, specifically an edged weapon warrior, as Howard described him. He's big, but he's not bulky. Howard describes him as pantherish. His trade involves hefting and swinging heavy iron weapons, so he would need thick wrists and forearms, broad shoulders, strong, solid abdominals, and massive thighs to brace himself, and his legs would be slightly bowed from all that horseback riding. He's muscled for work, not for show. What's the next one? And I was especially concerned with getting the right look for Conan's face. I didn't want to repeat the eternal scowl that had become so prevalent. I wanted something that indicated charisma. Conan comes to lead armies and a nation, and I don't believe anyone pulls that off unless they can win hearts and minds. Let's go to the next one. That was my first take on Howard's face, and I finally evolved it into this. Howard wrote Conan as being self-aware. He sees a long-range destiny for himself, even if it's a bit hazy at times. I wanted his consideration of a bigger picture reflected in his eyes. I wanted him to show intelligence and the ability to win loyalty. Yes, he can kill you in a heartbeat and without blinking, but there's more to him than just that. It's all in Howard's description. It's all there in the text. Oh, and let's go. This is my final portrait that was in the Conan book, the frontispiece portrait. Okay, let's go to the next one. Beyond the physical appearance of Conan, I also try to capture a bit of Howard's horror story creepiness in my illustrations, as Rankin and Frazetta have done so well, and I hope that on occasion I do pull that off. And these are evolving steps in my Queen of the Black Coast illustration from the Conan volume. So much of what I find attractive in Howard's writing revolves around his skill at creating atmosphere, those half-seen things in the shadows that engage our imagination and our fears. And this is the final version of this. I go through stages before I resolve final compositions in my work. Okay, next one. Beyond Conan, I've been able to lend my hand to a number of other Howard characters and stories, and this is my first take on the book cover for Almeric. And these are a few examples of how I evolved that. That's the second or third take, and this is the final. Yep, that's good. And this is the final result, cover art. Again, there's a lot of influence from guys like, from Frazetta. Obviously, you can't get around the influence Frazetta has had on all of us illustrators that have come since him. Okay, I've sometimes asked who is my favorite Howard illustrator, or whom I think has done the best job of creating images from his work. I usually try to dodge that by giving some ambiguous answer, because my opinion isn't going to be worth the argument I know that's going to follow. Which is not a bad thing in itself. It's good. But the truth is, I don't think that the illustrator who will do the most to enhance Howard's words has yet to come along. Our culture is still struggling to accept the works of true merit that lie buried within the vast banks of popular genre fiction. It's still an issue for many, discarding literary prejudices to find the gold inside the gold amidst the dross. But I'm an optimist, and I think that we're headed in the right direction. I think we're slowly moving toward a day when the best of Robert Howard's works will be read and regarded by that broader readership that has already accepted Hammett, Chandler, Bradbury, and now even Lovecraft, despite their pulpy origins. Robert Howard will be accepted as a significant 20th century American author, and only then, and it might still be generations away, but only then will some visual artists get past the genre conventions and surface details and find a way to accurately represent the unique perspective and the poetic verge of Robert E. Howard. Now, that's pretty much it, but before I go, I wouldn't be much of a commercial artist if I didn't wind up things by promoting my own works. I've got 2 new books coming out this summer. Portfolio is a massive collection of both finished and preliminary works. Let's go back to the portfolio. And then, okay, now let's go to the next one. You were right. And Storms at Sea is a novella that I both wrote and illustrated, and which I like to think has been somewhat influenced by Robert E. Howard. And both books will be in bookstores and available through online sources, such as Amazon, in August. Thank you.